The date is February 1940. The man's name is Simo Korhonen, and he is 26 years old, and he has not moved in 4 hours. He lies in a shallow depression in the snow approximately 300 meters east of the Kolla river line. In a section of forest that no Finnish army map has bothered to name because there is nothing here worth naming. Only spruce trees spaced at irregular intervals, their lower branches sagging under the weight of the night's snowfall, the ground beneath them swept almost clean by wind that comes off the frozen lake to the north. The temperature is -31 degrees Celsius. Korhonen knows this, not because he has checked an instrument, but because he knows what -31 feels like on the skin just below his jaw, which is the only part of his body that is exposed. The rest of him is buried. White camouflage smock, white trousers, white felt overboots pulled over his ski boots, white cloth wrapped around the barrel of his rifle. A depression scooped in the snow with both hands at dusk, packed smooth, then allowed to freeze for an hour before he settled into it so that the surface he occupies now is hard and still and does not betray his breathing with any trembling of loose crystals. His exhaled breath he directs sideways into the collar of his smock because he already knows what condensed breath looks like rising from a position in still air. He learned this as a child in the forests outside Suomussalmi, shooting rabbits, and the knowledge has remained in his body the way all knowledge learned before the age of 12 remains, not as thought but as reflex. The rifle resting in the crook of his arm is a Mosin Nagant M2830, Finnish-made, bolt-action, fed by a 5-round internal magazine. He has loaded it. He has not chambered a round because chambering a round produces a sound, and he has learned over the last 11 weeks of this war that sound in a frozen forest carries distances that men who grew up in cities find difficult to believe. He will chamber the round when he is ready to fire, and not before. He is not ready to fire. He is waiting. What he is waiting for crosses the open ground 280 meters to his east at 14:23 when a patrol of 7 Soviet soldiers emerges from the tree line on the far side of the clearing, moving in single file, rifles slung, collars turned up against the cold. They move in the loose, uncertain way of men who are cold and tired and not expecting contact. The man at the front is breaking trail through 40 centimeters of unbroken snow, and he is working hard and breathing visibly and falling slightly behind the pace he is trying to set. Korhonen watches, he counts, he assesses, he chambers around. The first man at the rear of the column drops without a sound. In the frozen air, the crack of the Mosin Nagant reaches the rest of the patrol approximately 1 second after the man has already fallen, and in that 1 second, the remaining 6 men have not yet understood what has happened. By the time they understand, Korhonen has worked the bolt and chambered a second round. The second man drops. By the time the remaining 5 men have identified the direction the shots are coming from, which is not where any of them would have guessed, because Korhonen has chosen a position that places his muzzle blast into the wind and the wind carries it away from the clearing. Korhonen has moved. He is already 10 meters to the left, rolling through the snow, pulling himself along on his elbows, the rifle cradled across his forearms. He has not stood up. He has not made any vertical profile that a scanning eye could find against the background of the forest floor. By the time the Soviets open fire, they are firing at a position that is empty. This is the story that the Wehrmacht would spend 3 years trying to understand and never quite manage to solve. It begins in the forests of Finland in the winter of 1939, and it ends not with any single event, but with an institutional recognition spreading slowly through German military command structures on the northern and Arctic fronts, that there exists a category of soldier against whom the tactical doctrines developed for the plains of France and the steppes of Russia are not merely insufficient, but actively dangerous to apply. It ends with orders. Written orders distributed through chains of command, instructing German soldiers in specific and explicit terms that if they find themselves in open ground and believe they may be under observation by Finnish marksmen, they are not to engage. They are to withdraw. They are to take cover. They are to do anything except stand and fight, because standing and fighting in open ground against Finnish snipers is not combat. It is selection, and the Wehrmacht is always on the wrong side of it. But to understand why those orders exist and what they cost the German command to issue, because no army issues an order telling its soldiers to run without an enormous amount of institutional pain first, it is necessary to go back to the beginning, to the winter of 1939, to the war that the world expected to last 2 weeks and that instead produced something that no military academy in Europe had prepared its officers to confront. The Soviet Union declares war on Finland on November 30th, 1939. The strategic logic, from Moscow's perspective, is impeccable. Finland is a small nation of fewer than 4 million people. The Red Army has 1 million men massed on the Finnish border. The Soviet Union has more tanks than Finland has soldiers. It has an air force that can reach any point in Finnish territory within an hour. The Finnish army's standing force numbers approximately 33,000 men. Its total mobilized strength, including reserves, is perhaps 300,000, and those reserves are farmers, loggers, and hunters who have never worn a uniform in anger. The Soviet General Staff estimates the campaign will take between 10 and 12 days. The foreign press gives Finland 3 weeks at the outside. The Finnish government receives diplomatic inquiries about post-occupation governance before the first Soviet shell has landed. The terrain does not appear on the Soviet staff maps in any useful way. The border runs for 1,340 kilometers, from the Gulf of Finland in the south to the Arctic Ocean in the north, and along most of it, the ground is a military planner's nightmare. Dense pine and birch forest, broken by frozen lakes, peat bogs covered by deceptive crusts of snow, ravines that cut across any axis of advance without warning, swamps that are passable in summer and lethal in winter if you leave the narrow tracks that wind between the trees. There are no major roads west of the Soviet border. There are no rail lines that can support a mechanized advance. There is, in most of the theater, simply forest, and inside the forest there is darkness, and inside the darkness there is cold. And the cold is of a specific Finnish variety that the Soviet planners, sitting in heated offices in Moscow, do not fully account for. Into this terrain, the Red Army sends its divisions in column on the roads that exist, with the flanks of those columns open to the forest on both sides. The result is not a war. It is a systematic education in the consequences of assuming that the qualities required to defeat an enemy are the same qualities required to industrialize a nation. The Soviet Union has done the latter brilliantly. It has prepared for the former inadequately, at least in this theater, in this terrain, against this specific opponent. The Finnish army has one advantage that no amount of Soviet industrial production can replicate. Its soldiers know the forest. They have grown up in it, worked in it, hunted in it. They can navigate without roads in darkness and in whiteout conditions. They can build shelter from snow in temperatures where exposure kills a man in minutes. They can ski across terrain that Soviet infantry must wade through on foot, losing 3 hours for every 1 hour a Finnish ski patrol covers. And they can shoot, not with the mechanical competence of soldiers who have passed a marksmanship course, but with the instinctive deep tissue accuracy of men who have been feeding their families by rifle since the age of 10. It is in this context that the Finnish sniper emerges, not as a program, not as a doctrine, not as a deliberate military policy devised in a staff room. The Finnish sniper emerges the way all genuinely effective military innovations emerge, as an organic response by skilled individuals to a specific tactical problem. The problem is simple. Finland cannot match the Soviet Union in firepower, in armor, in manpower, or in material. What Finland can do is take the battle into terrain where firepower and armor and manpower count for less, and where individual skill, patience, fieldcraft, and intimate knowledge of the landscape count for more. The forest is Finland's equalizer. The sniper is the forest's most efficient weapon. The figures that accumulate over the course of the Winter War, which lasts not 10 days but 105, are of a kind that military statisticians find difficult to present with a straight face. Simo Hayha, the most documented Finnish sniper of the conflict, is credited by Finnish army records with 542 confirmed kills in 98 days of active operations, operating without a telescopic sight in temperatures that regularly dropped below -40 degrees Celsius. The number is so large that it is frequently dismissed as exaggeration by commentators unfamiliar with the specific conditions of the Kola River sector where Hayha operated. Those commentators are wrong. The number is consistent with the operational environment: a static defensive line, predictable Soviet approach routes, dense concentration of Soviet infantry, and a shooter whose fieldcraft was such that the enemy never established his position with enough certainty to direct suppressing fire effectively. Hayha was not a legend. He was a consequence of conditions. But Hayha is the name that history remembers because he is the most extreme case. He is not alone. Finnish army records from the Winter War document dozens of snipers with confirmed kill counts above 50, and scores more with counts that, while lower, represent a rate of lethality per individual soldier that no army in the conflict, Soviet, German, British or Finnish, had planned for or trained to counter. The Soviet 44th Division, advancing along the Hayha Road in January 1940, is destroyed almost entirely by Finnish forces in which snipers play a central role. The 18th Rifle Division loses more than half its strength in the forests around Loimola. The 163rd Rifle Division is encircled and effectively annihilated at Suomussalmi. The pattern, repeated across dozens of engagements, is the same. Soviet infantry advances in column on a road or track. Finnish snipers eliminate the officers and non-commissioned officers at the head and rear of the column. The column halts. Soviet soldiers move into the forest to seek cover. Finnish ski patrols close around the halted column's flanks and rear, and the column, which was a military unit an hour ago, becomes a collection of freezing men firing into dark trees at enemies they cannot see or locate. And meanwhile, in the headquarters of Army Group North, in the winter of 1940, German military intelligence officers are reading the reports from Finland with an attention that goes considerably beyond academic interest. Germany and Finland are not at war. Germany and the Soviet Union are, at this moment, nominally aligned under the terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. But German military intelligence is professional and thorough, and what it sees in the reports from the Karelian Isthmus and the forests around Suomussalmi is not a Soviet humiliation to be quietly dismissed. It is a phenomenon to be studied. Because Germany has its own interests in Scandinavia, its own plans for the Northern Theatre, and its own coming need to operate in exactly the kind of terrain that is currently eating Soviet divisions alive. The German occupation of Norway begins in April 1940. And with it begins the German army's direct encounter with a strategic and tactical reality that the Finnish Winter War had previewed but not fully prepared them for. Norway is not Finland, and the Norwegians do not fight the same war the Finns fought. But the terrain is the same general category of problem: mountains, fjords, forests, climate, and within the German military structure in Norway there begins, slowly and somewhat informally at first, a process of institutional learning about what it means to fight in this landscape against an opponent who understands it and you do not. The first German units to occupy northern Norway encounter no Finnish snipers because the Finnish front is 500 kilometers to the east and the two countries are not yet in formal military collaboration. What they encounter instead is the landscape itself. And the landscape communicates the same lesson the Soviets learned in a much more expensive way, that in forests and mountains and open tundra above the tree line, the relationship between concealment and visibility operates according to rules that are the inverse of the rules on the plains of Central Europe. On the plains, a man who lies flat in open ground is approximately as visible as a man who stands. The ground is the same color in all directions. There is nowhere to be invisible. In the Finnish and Norwegian landscape, a man who lies flat in snow, wearing the right clothing in the right position, is invisible to someone standing upright 20 meters away. This asymmetry, the asymmetry between the man who moves and the man who does not, the man who stands and the man who lies, the man who presents a vertical silhouette and the man who presents a horizontal one, is the foundational tactical reality that Finnish sniper doctrine exploits, and that German soldiers on the Northern Front spent the early years of the war learning to respect. The formal German engagement with Finnish snipers begins with the opening of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, when Finland re-enters the war as a co-belligerent, not an ally in any formal sense, a distinction the Finnish government maintains with considerable diplomatic care throughout the conflict, but a nation fighting the same enemy on an adjacent front. German and Finnish forces operate in proximity in the far north, in the theatre that encompasses the Karelian Front, the Arctic Front above Murmansk, and the defensive lines in the forests of eastern Finland. The two armies share intelligence, coordinate logistics to a limited degree, and observe each other's methods. And what the German officers in the north observe, watching Finnish units operate, produces in many of them a reaction that falls somewhere between professional admiration and genuine unease. The Finnish sniper of 1941 is not the same figure as the Finnish sniper of 1939, though the individual soldiers are often the same men. The Winter War has transformed what was a set of individual skills into a recognized and systematized military capability. The Finnish army has not, in the conventional sense, created a sniper school or a formal sniper program. Finland's military resources do not run to the kind of institutional elaboration that larger powers can afford. What it has done is recognize, codify, and disseminate the lessons of the Winter War's most effective shooters in a way that allows those lessons to propagate through the Finnish military system. Snipers are now selected more deliberately, they are equipped more thoughtfully, and they operate within a tactical framework that integrates their capabilities with a larger Finnish defensive posture in ways that make them considerably more dangerous than individual skilled shooters operating on instinct. The tactical framework is built around three principles that German intelligence analysts studying captured Finnish documents and interrogating Finnish prisoners eventually identify and write up in reports that circulate through the Wehrmacht chain of command on the Northern Front. The first principle is patience. Finnish snipers do not engage at the first opportunity. They observe, they establish patterns, they identify high-value targets, officers, radio operators, crew-served weapon teams, supply personnel, and they wait for those targets to present themselves under conditions that maximize the sniper's chance of making the shot and minimizing the chance that the shot will allow the enemy to locate the firing position. The patience involved is not metaphorical. Finnish snipers routinely occupy observation positions for periods of 6 to 8 hours without changing position, in temperatures that turn Soviet and German soldiers into hypothermic casualties within 2 hours of exposure. This is not willpower. It is equipment and training and a physiological adaptation to cold that Finnish soldiers possess and that men raised in Central European climates simply do not. The second principle is mobility. A Finnish sniper who fires from a position does not remain in that position. The interval between firing and moving is, in the cases documented by German after-action reports, measured in seconds. The sniper fires, rolls, moves laterally under the cover of whatever ground feature is available, a fold in the snow, a fallen tree, the depression left by a previous footprint, and reaches a new position, often 20 to 30 meters from the original, before the sound of the shot has fully registered in the target area. German soldiers who attempt to return fire at the location of the muzzle flash are consistently firing at empty ground. The muzzle flash is gone. The shooter is gone. The next shot, if it comes from a different angle. The third principle is target selection. Finnish snipers kill officers. This is not an absolute rule. A Finnish sniper who has a clean shot at a column of soldiers does not ignore the column to wait for the officer. But when the choice exists, officers are the preferred target. Radio operators are the second preferred target. Medics, in some documented instances, are targeted specifically, a practice that German after-action reports note with particular bitterness, and that reflects a Finnish tactical calculation that is coldly logical if morally uncomfortable. A dead soldier removes one man from the fight, but a wounded soldier who cannot be reached by medics removes the dead soldier plus the 2 or 3 men who will attempt the evacuation, plus the medic who will attempt treatment, plus the officers who will divert attention to manage the evacuation. The economics of the wounded in a sniper engagement are different from the economics of the dead, and Finnish snipers understand the economics. The German command on the northern front begins receiving consistent reports from unit commanders about these patterns in the autumn of 1941, and the reports accelerate through 1942 as the Finnish-German contact deepens and the operational picture on the Arctic front stabilizes into the long static phase that will characterize the Northern Theatre for the remainder of the war. The reports describe, in the careful language of military bureaucracy, encounters that are clearly affecting the morale and operational capacity of German units in ways that standard tactical responses are not addressing. Officers are being picked off during routine movements. Supply convoys are being disrupted by single shooters who cannot be located or engaged effectively. Patrols that enter forested terrain in sectors believed to be held by Finnish marksmen are returning with casualties and without any contact report that allows the Germans to identify firing positions or direct counterfire. The response from German command is at first institutional and tentative, the way military bureaucracies always respond to problems that don't fit existing categories. Additional training is directed. Tactical guidance is circulated. Officers are reminded of the basic principles of fieldcraft, as if the problem is a matter of individual German soldiers forgetting to use cover and concealment rather than a matter of facing opponents whose camouflage and patience and marksmanship are genuinely superior in this specific environment. The additional training does not solve the problem. The tactical guidance does not solve the problem. And slowly, over the course of 1942 and into 1943, as the reports accumulate and the casualty figures in sniper-related incidents on the Northern Front begin to acquire a weight that even optimistic staff officers cannot rationalize away, German command arrives at a conclusion that is, for a military culture built on the concept of aggressive forward action, genuinely difficult to accept. The problem is not solvable through standard means. The problem is not a matter of training or preparation or tactical adjustment that can be made on the German side. The problem is that in the specific environment of the Finnish front, in the forests and the open tundra and the terrain above the tree line where there is no cover from a shooter who has chosen his ground, German soldiers cannot reliably detect Finnish snipers before Finnish snipers have already fired. The orders that result from this conclusion are, in military terms, remarkable. Not because the underlying tactical logic is obscure. Experienced soldiers on the Northern Front have understood for some time that engaging in open ground under observation is suicide. But because the orders make explicit and institutional what had previously been understood only individually and informally. They circulate through the Wehrmacht structure on the Northern Front in the form of tactical directives, translated and preserved in the Finnish military archive at Mikkeli and in German records captured at the war's end. The language is precise. If movement in open terrain is assessed to be under observation by Finnish marksmen, units are to halt. Cover is to be sought immediately. Movement is to be resumed only under smoke cover, only at intervals calculated to deny a clean shot, and, in the starkest formulation of the directive, units are not to engage Finnish sniper positions frontally under any circumstances. The directive acknowledges, in the flat language of military bureaucracy, that engaging a Finnish sniper who has chosen his ground and occupies a concealed position produces a predictable outcome. The engaging unit takes additional casualties without achieving suppression. This is an extraordinary document for an extraordinary reason. The Wehrmacht in 1943 is still an army that considers tactical retreat to require specific authorization from higher command. An army whose culture of forward aggression is so deeply embedded that officers who order withdrawals without explicit permission face courts-martial. An army that has built its entire operational doctrine on the principle that fire superiority and tactical initiative belong to the side that acts first and acts boldly. And this army is now issuing written orders telling its soldiers in specific and operational terms that against a specific category of opponent in a specific terrain, the appropriate response is to not engage, to withdraw, to yield the ground. The Finnish army, when these orders become known through captured documents and prisoner interrogation, receives them with a particular kind of quiet satisfaction. The Finnish military relationship with understatement is as well documented as the Finnish military relationship with cold weather, and the reaction of Finnish commanders to the news that the Wehrmacht has formally instructed its soldiers not to fight them in open ground is not triumphalism. It is something closer to professional acknowledgement. The orders confirm what Finnish snipers already knew from the responses they were encountering in the field, that German soldiers had begun to behave differently in their presence, more cautiously, more reluctantly to cross open ground, more inclined to use available cover even when tactical doctrine would have previously called for rapid forward movement. The orders give institutional form to a behavioral change that Finnish snipers had already observed. Among the Finnish snipers on the Karelian front in 1942 and 1943, the figure who most clearly embodies the quality that the German orders are attempting to address is a man named Sulo Kolka. Kolka served with the 1st Infantry Regiment and is credited by Finnish army records with 406 confirmed kills, the second highest confirmed total of any Finnish sniper in the war, and a figure that represents an operational output sustained over a longer period than Hayha's record, since Kolka operates through the continuation war of 1941 to 1944, rather than the compressed intensity of the Winter War. Kolka is not, in any conventional military sense, a specialist. He is an infantryman who happens to be a gifted shot. He carries standard Finnish issue equipment. He operates within his unit's tactical framework rather than as a lone operator. What distinguishes him is not any unusual access to special weapons or training, but a combination of patience, fieldcraft, and target selection discipline that the German tactical directives are essentially acknowledging cannot be neutralized by the standard suite of responses available to a unit that encounters a sniper and attempts to fight back. Kolka's documented method, reconstructed from Finnish unit records and the accounts of soldiers who served with him, follows the three-principle framework almost exactly as the German intelligence analysts described it. Long observation periods before engagement, immediate lateral movement after each shot, and consistent prioritization of officers and crew-served weapon operators as targets. His ability to remain still in cold that forces German soldiers to move, to stamp their feet, to change position, to generate the warmth their bodies require, gives him a systematic advantage that no amount of German marksmanship training can directly address, because the disadvantage is not in marksmanship. It is in physiology, in equipment, and in accumulated environmental knowledge that takes a lifetime to acquire. The German tactical directives multiply and become more specific through 1943, as the front stabilizes into the long defensive phase that will last until the Soviet breakthrough of June 1944. German units on the Northern Front develop informal procedures that go beyond what the written orders specify. Procedures that German veterans would describe after the war in terms that make clear the extent to which operating in range of Finnish marksmen had reorganized their tactical habits. Movement across open ground is scheduled for periods of low visibility, dawn, dusk, and fog, whenever mission requirements permit. Officers routinely remove or conceal rank insignia in forward positions. Smoking in daylight near forward positions is prohibited, not for the usual noise and smell reasons, but because the movement of a hand to a mouth and the small flame of a match or lighter are sufficient to draw a shot from 400 meters. Radio antenna configurations are changed and moved regularly, because Finnish snipers have identified the characteristic sight picture of a radio operator as a targeting cue. The cumulative effect of these adjustments is a significant reduction in the operational flexibility and tempo of German units on the Northern Front, not because the units are incompetent or cowardly, but because operating under the continuous possibility of sniper observation imposes a cognitive and physical tax that compounds over weeks and months into a meaningful degradation of combat effectiveness. This is the strategic calculation that underpins Finnish sniper doctrine, and it is one that neither the Red Army during the Winter War nor the Wehrmacht during the Continuation War ever fully internalizes as doctrine of their own. The Finnish sniper does not exist to kill at scale. The Finnish sniper exists to impose a cost in officers, in command coherence, in tactical confidence, in the willingness of individual soldiers to perform the routine movements that sustain an army in the field. The cost is not counted in single engagements. It is counted in the cumulative weight of thousands of small engagements across months of static front, each one extracting a precise individual toll and generating a disproportionate institutional response. The mathematics are not complicated, but they are devastating. One Finnish sniper who eliminates 3 officers in a week does not reduce an opposing regiment's manpower by 3 men. He reduces it by 3 officers, which is a qualitatively different loss. And he forces that regiment to reorganize its command structure, change its movement patterns, and operate with a constant background awareness that its leadership is a target. That awareness is itself a weapon. By 1944, the German tactical relationship with Finnish snipers has settled into something that can only be described as a permanent institutional wariness. The written orders have been absorbed into practice, the behavioral adjustments have become habit, and the Wehrmacht on the Northern Front has arrived, through a process of painful empirical learning, at a position that a thoughtful military analyst would have predicted from the start of the Finnish-German operational relationship. In terrain that favors the defender against soldiers whose skills are native to that terrain, offensive doctrine of the kind that the Wehrmacht has refined for operations in Western and Eastern Europe is not applicable without severe modification. The Finnish sniper is not a special case to be addressed with special tactics. The Finnish sniper is a symptom of a landscape, and the landscape cannot be countered by an order. It can only be respected. The German recognition of this fact, institutional, reluctant, and expressed in the antiseptic language of operational directives, represents something that military historians have not always adequately acknowledged in accounts of the Northern Front. The focus of most historical attention to German operations in the north has been on the strategic questions. The failure to take Murmansk, the management of the Norwegian garrison, the eventual negotiated Finnish exit from the war in September 1944. These are the large frame questions, and they are important ones. But the texture of the Northern Front, the experience of the individual German soldier operating in the forests and on the tundra near the Finnish positions, the daily calculation of risk that accompanied any movement in observed terrain, the institutional modifications that multiplied through the German order of battle as the front stabilized. This texture is shaped in no small part by the presence of Finnish snipers and the formal acknowledgement in written orders that the Wehrmacht cannot adequately respond to them. The Finnish snipers themselves do not survive the war in the same configuration in which they entered it. Simo Hayha is shot through the jaw by a Soviet counter-sniper in March 1940, 11 days before the Winter War ends. He survives, undergoes multiple surgeries, and lives until 2002. He never speaks at length about the Winter War for public consumption, and the accounts that attribute elaborate philosophical positions to him are, by his family's account, largely invented. He was a farmer who was good at shooting, and when the war ended, he went back to farming and hunting, and the 542 men he killed remained in his accounting a fact of the war rather than a source of either pride or regret. Sulo Kolka survives the continuation war and returns to civilian life. His 406 confirmed kills make him the second highest confirmed Finnish sniper of the entire conflict, and he is, after Hayha, almost entirely unknown outside Finland. The gap between these men's operational records and their public profiles outside their home country is itself a kind of commentary on the nature of the Northern Front, a theatre that history remembers less vividly than the campaigns at Kursk or El Alamein or in the Pacific. But that was, for the men who fought it, exactly as total, exactly as cold, and exactly as lethal. The Wehrmacht orders that told German soldiers not to engage Finnish snipers in open ground remain, in the documentary record, one of the more remarkable admissions produced by any modern army. They are not a surrender, they are not a capitulation. They are something more interesting, a formal acknowledgement by one of the most aggressive and operationally sophisticated military organizations of the 20th century, that there exists a combination of individual skill, environmental knowledge, and tactical patience that its doctrines and training cannot effectively counter. The orders say, in the clean language of military directives, what the soldiers on the Northern Front already knew from experience, that in the specific terrain and against the specific opponent of the Finnish front, the calculation of engagement changes, that the man who fires first does not always win, that sometimes the correct tactical decision is to not be there. What the Finnish snipers built was not a weapon system. It was a reputation, specific, earned, and operationally consequential. A reputation strong enough that it entered the Wehrmacht's written doctrine, modified German soldiers' behavior across an entire front, and outlasted the war itself as a reference point for military analysts thinking about the relationship between individual skill and institutional response. That a relatively small nation of farmers and loggers and hunters fighting with bolt-action rifles and without optical sights in conditions that killed men who stood still for an hour could force the Wehrmacht to formally change how it moved and fought in their presence. That is not a footnote. That is a subject. The debate this story leaves open is not a comfortable one. The Finnish sniper is, in every technical and tactical sense, an exemplary soldier. His effectiveness is not in dispute, but the orders he provoked and the institutional fear he generated raise a question that military historians and ethicists have circled around without fully resolving. When a nation so thoroughly dominates a particular form of warfare that it forces its enemy to formally acknowledge it cannot engage, when the kill rates, the tactical effectiveness, and the psychological impact are all measurably extraordinary, does the credit belong to the individual soldier, to the culture that produced him, or to the landscape that shaped both? And if the landscape is the variable, what does that tell us about the limits of training, doctrine, and institutional knowledge as substitutes for the kind of skill that can only be grown in a specific place over a specific lifetime? There is no single answer. The Finnish sniper did not win the Winter War alone. Finland survived through the collective effort of its mobilized civilian army, its command improvisation, its logistical endurance, and ultimately through a political negotiation that gave the Soviet Union the territory it originally demanded without giving it what it actually wanted, which was Finland itself. The sniper was a component of a larger system. But the orders, the German orders that said, "Do not engage in open ground," were not written about the larger system. They were written about the man in the snow. The man who had been lying still for 4 hours and who could, by all evidence available to German command, lie still for 4 more. If this story hit you, like and subscribe. We find these forgotten stories every single day. Here is the debate. The German orders that told soldiers not to engage Finnish snipers. Was that a rational military decision, or was it the moment the Wehrmacht admitted in writing that it had already lost control of a front? Leave your answer below and watch this next video.